Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Climate Leadership Awards webinar on restructuring the awards for the future. I'd like to also welcome everyone. This is the first of our workshops with the Climate Leadership Conference of 2022. My name is Verena Radulovic, and I'm the Vice President for Business Engagement at the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, otherwise known as C2ES. Today, we are going to walk through a proposal for revising the Climate Leadership Awards that have been going on for about 10 years. We know that many of you are very interested in this topic, and many of you have asked us what our awards are going to be this year. And so we wanted to take a moment to pause and reflect on the last 10 years and take time to really think through what do the next phase of climate leadership look like, and how can these awards better reflect that. So I'm going to walk through some quick introductions with my teammates here, but I'll give an overview of what we're going to do today. Today, we're going to provide just a discussion and an overview of the awards themselves and how they engage in the market and how they can potentially drive corporate climate leadership going forward. And we'll be asking a lot of questions. The purpose of this webinar today is to get feedback from people. This will be recorded, and so we will be able to share it again, and take this time in the next coming months to get feedback from people on the value of the awards and then also on the proposed criteria itself. We're going to walk through an idea, a proposal for how to revise the award categories, providing you an overview, but really also providing some clarity on the eligibility requirements and the evaluation criteria on what we think is a more simplified approach, but one that is also holistic and all-encompassing and is flexible to capture the ever-evolving landscape of corporate climate leadership. We'll also walk through an anticipated and proposed timeline and next steps. And our intent here today is to leave plenty of time for questions, which you can add into the Chime platform that you are currently viewing this on. So with that, I'd like to introduce my fellow teammates. First up, we'll hear from Matt Klaus, who is the Chief of the Energy Supply and Industry Branch at the US EPA, followed by Christopher Kent, who is also with the Center for Corporate Climate Leadership at the US EPA, and then followed by Dan Kreckelberg, Policy Director of the Climate Registry. And I should note that the Climate Registry is the other co-host of the Climate Leadership Conference. And I do want to welcome back my former teammates from EPA, as EPA has had a long involvement in both the Climate Leadership Conference as well as the Climate Leadership Awards themselves. So with that, we're going to walk through kind of an overview of the awards themselves and how they engage in the marketplace and take time to look at the value of the awards overall. With that, I turn it over to Matt Klaus.
Thank you, Verena. It's a pleasure for Chris and me to join you and Dan for today's workshop. Let's switch to the next slide. What I'd like to do is walk you through a little bit of the background on the Climate Leadership Awards program, how we work together on that, what we've heard as feedback about it, talk about some of the things that we value with the awards, and then start by providing some high-level questions about the awards program before we shift into discussing about the proposed changes to this program. We want to make sure we're getting your feedback that this is valuable to you and is highlighting the right activities. So let me start by saying, since in 2011, EPA began working with our partners, C2ES and TCR, to create the Climate Leadership Awards. And since 2012, the Climate Leadership Awards has been a joint program in which we partner together to recognize climate leadership. And so now in its 11th year, the Climate Leadership Awards program has recognized over 150 winners in its efforts to highlight organizational, individual, and other types of climate leadership among companies. The awards program really is trying to motivate new and innovative behaviors above and beyond what are best practices. So let's get into that. Next slide. This joint awards program has sought to recognize a broad range of organizational leaders, not just businesses. It could include higher education, institutional leadership, And we've always tried to highlight organizations that are aggressive in setting and achieving emission reduction targets. We've looked to recognize supply chain GHG management or value chain GHG management, highlight individuals that are setting an important tone and driving action, and as well as highlighting partnerships. So we think this program has elevated great examples of leadership, innovation, and reinforced key practices we want others to follow. Next slide. EPA and its partners, C2ES and TCR, have received feedback that these awards serve to really highlight award winners' work and their industry. And we value these award programs because of the voluntary actions you all undertake to reduce emissions and reduce other environmental impacts, and help make, through your leadership, we make the innovation and leadership become best practices that others can replicate, follow, and use in their own strategies. We think these also help improve resource and operational management, which would help your bottom line as well. Next slide. And high level, these provide external validation of your innovations to address climate change, provide social proof externally of those innovations that others can follow and replicate, provide a great marketing opportunity to help differentiate your business or your organization from others, and then fundamentally provide an opportunity to celebrate those achievements, which helps boost employee morale and engagement, and help you provide you with that opportunity to engage with even more stakeholders and partners out there about your activities. Next slide. So we've heard from past awardees that, as you can see here, that it helps validate the activities they're doing, that they are particularly appreciative of these three organizations recognizing their activities, and really helps fortify their own internal momentum and build upon that to continue their efforts. Next slide. So with that context, we're going to highlight some of the high-level questions that we have for you, our attendees today, before we transition into a discussion about how we might evolve the awards program. So I will just kind of highlight some of what you see in these questions on this slide and the next slide, but just to give you some things to think about following what I've said and before you hear from the rest of my colleagues about the proposed updates to the award program. Fundamentally, we'd like to know if these awards are driving leadership in reducing emissions, and if they're distinct from other forms of recognition that you're aware of, or awards programs that you're aware of. Which stakeholders, whether they be internal or external, take notice if your organization is recognized with a Climate Leadership Award? How does that help? Has a Climate Leadership Award for you, or the prospect of receiving a Climate Leadership Award, would it help you leverage your efforts internally? Would it increase support for your organization's current actions on climate change? We'd like feedback on the current award categories that we have to date. What about those award categories that you like or don't like? And really importantly, how could we improve those to be to further drive action, to further be meaningful to you, and help achieve our shared interest? Next slide. And so wrapping up here on slide 11, how can we best highlight leadership to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and how can these awards complement the new crop of business leadership initiatives. Are they needed? Is the award program needed? And lastly, trying to paraphrase my list of questions here is, how can we really incentivize organizational and individual climate leadership? We'll be taking questions at the end of the presentation, but we also welcome written and otherwise communicated responses to these questions. It will really help us. And with the next slide, we'll transition into the Climate Leadership Award categories. And I believe, Dan, you may be next. Sorry, Chris, take it away.
Thanks, Matt. Again, I'm Chris Kent. I work at EPA in the Energy Supply and Industry branch and work on both the Center for Corporate Climate Leadership as well as the Green Power Partnership Program. I'm going to sort of walk through the current award categories and how we're transitioning to a proposed change. So since 2012, when the first awards were given out, these were the 6 award categories. And when you look at them, there's been about 150 to 170 different awards over the past 9 years that have been given out. Starting with the organizational leadership, 30 awards have been given out for this category. And this category recognizes organizations that not only have comprehensive greenhouse gas inventories and aggressive emission reduction goals, but they've also demonstrated leadership in addressing climate change, both internally and externally. And then we have the individual leadership awards. 15 of those awards have been given out in the past. And this award recognizes individuals who have shown remarkable leadership in addressing climate change and engaging with others. Moving down the list, we have the Supply Chain Leadership Award, and 13 awards have been given out over the years. And this recognizes organizations that not only have their own comprehensive greenhouse gas inventory, but are at the leading edge of managing greenhouse gas emissions of their organizational supply chains. And then next, we have the next two, the Excellence in Greenhouse Gas Management, both the Goal Setting Certificate and Goal Achievement Award. These have represented the bulk of the awards over the past years, with 50 being given out for goal achievement and 49 being given out for goal setting. Both of these are recognizing organizations that have set and achieved aggressive greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. And finally, we have the Innovative Partnership Certificate, and 13 awards have been given out over the past years. This category recognizes organizations working together to establish and meet their greenhouse gas reduction goals and or adaptation or resilience activities. All of these past winners have been detailed on the climateleadershipconference.org CLA winners website. So with those thoughts and discussions whirling around, the team that's been examining the Climate Leadership Award categories have proposed reducing the number of awards from 6 to these 3 over on the right. But as you see, as we've gone through each of these award categories in a bit more detail later on in this conversation, we think it makes sense to reduce the number of award categories while existing the scope of awards. The increased scope includes the institutionalization of engaging with supply chain or engaging with communities disproportionately influenced or impacted by environmental impacts, as well as working on adaptation and resilience. Now, we expect the number of awards to go down due to the previous large number of goal setting and goal achievement awards handed out in the past, which represents about 60% of past awardees. But we are hopeful that the new award applications demonstrate the broad target achievements realized by organizations, but also have institutionalized target setting incorporated and are working on supply chain issues and climate justice and other activities that align with their broader sustainability efforts. So, in setting clear greenhouse gas emission reduction targets and defining priorities are an important step in achieving your organizational greenhouse gas footprint reduction targets. So in looking at past award applications and winners, the team was working on examining, which of the CLAs noted in the marketplace have matured to a point where, goal setting and target setting are really much more commonplace, and as such should be incorporated into all award categories as a basic requirement. Similarly, as organizations commit to reducing carbon footprints of their products and services, they're now looking to their suppliers to align their efforts with their organization's sustainability goals. That interdependence between supplier and buyer can be leveraged to launch emission reduction initiatives that support the bottom line of both parties and achieve sustainability goals. However, the team working on examining CLAs thought that applications for that specific award category were diminishing over time, and by incorporating it into both the organizational leadership and innovative partnerships, we'll be looking at supply chain issues from a broad range of possible awardees. So here's the next round of questions and issues that we're seeking your feedback on. So for the first question, we really like your thoughts on these proposed reduced number of award categories. Do you agree with us that target setting and achievement don't require their own awards category, as most organizations now, it's part of their standard operational activity? And looking at these proposed changes, do you want us to keep these target setting and achievements as a recognition category? And if you do, why? We could rework these target categories to demonstrate climate leadership. Are there other thoughts that we should have? For the next question, number 9, we understand that there are fewer award categories will mean fewer awards distributed. One perspective could be that the awards are even more exclusive and perhaps with a bit more cachet. But another perspective could be that fewer awards mean fewer organizations are promoting the awards program, which would make them more obscure. We would really appreciate your thoughts on this. Is fewer better? Is more better? These are the questions we're sort of interested in. And finally, for the question number 10, we tried to integrate the supply chain leadership criteria, climate justice, resilience, and mitigation efforts into these award categories. In lieu of creating a separate one, we would really like to know your thoughts on this approach. It's risky to stop doing an award for a broad part of what everyone's doing, but we think that by incorporating it into these other ones, we should be demonstrating how it is part of the normal everyday operations. So, as previously noted, so moving on from the structure of the award categories and on to, we're going to be talking them individually. But first, there's some, overall eligibility requirements that all Climate Leadership Award applicants must meet in order to be eligible for the award. Starting off with the source of the operations. All applicants must have a significant operations in the U.S. While we understand that there's, how climate change isn't respectful of national boundaries, this awards program is focused on U.S.-based organizations. And so while we require the amount of the organization's operations in the U.S., the majority of the greenhouse gas emissions may occur outside the U.S. national boundaries. And with each award cycle, the time frame under which the organizations reporting their greenhouse gas reductions needs to shift. So for this upcoming award cycle in 2003, and due to other reporting timelines as well, the activities highlighted for this awards applications will need to take place between January 1st of 2020 through December 31st. And all the application submissions, at the time of the application submissions, the activities must be ongoing and current. Now, as noted here, within the application, organizations and individuals can reference activities outside that time frame, as well as document how those activities outlined in the application serve as a foundational structure for their current and ongoing efforts to provide measurable emission reductions. And then finally, prior to finalizing and notifying awardees, all candidates must be screened to ensure there's no outstanding issues with that organization that could impact the award. These screenings include environmental compliance, civil rights screening, as well as a financial screening. So 3 more questions that we would like your input on as we continue to refine these basic eligibility requirements. First of all, is this first one. It's sort of a catch-all. we're seeking your input on whether or not these few listed eligibility requirements are sufficient and required from all of the remaining award categories. Are there other requirements that we should be adding to hone the awards program or to focus them? Are these too few? Is it too few for a threshold? Remember that this is a climate leadership award, and they're intended to be reflective of the current market's leaders in greenhouse gas emissions. Are there other basic requirements that we should be incorporating? And the next question, are there other requirements that should be incorporated to ensure that all candidates applying for the CLAs are really in the leadership class? And finally, the reporting timeframe. Currently, the January 20 through the end of 21. It's a 2-year timeframe. Is that appropriate for this award cycle? Is it too long, too short? And of course, March of 2020 started the pandemic. So how has the pandemic impacted your ability to meet target emissions reductions? And will that have an impact on your ability to apply for an awards program? These are some of the questions that we are interested in. But we're going to go deeper into each of the award categories, starting with the organizational leadership, and that will be with Dan.
Thank you, Christopher. Yeah, I'm going to go into more detail here on 2 of the proposed award categories, starting with organizational leadership, and then I'll talk about individual leadership. I'll first start with, for each one, draft objectives, then talk about the eligibility requirements, a little more detail on that, and then specific examples of how the evaluation would work for each category. So for organizational leadership, some of the objectives that we're looking at here is a focus on organizations that are exemplifying extraordinary leadership on climate change and transitioning to clean energy to facilitate greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So that's kind of a key objective, is GHG emissions reductions, but there's a few other indicators that we'll be looking for as well. So primarily, we'll be looking at emissions reductions within internal operations of organizations, but also looking beyond that as well with supply chains or value chains. So that would be suppliers or distributors that are working with organizations would be considered as well. We'd like to see organizations that are doing comprehensive, very detailed greenhouse gas inventories that have undergone verification. I'll talk more about that in a subsequent slide. Organizations that have set aggressive emissions reduction targets and have disclosed that. They've made that known that they're seeking to achieve that target and are making progress to that target, or have set targets in the past and have demonstrated that they've achieved those targets. And then also on top of greenhouse gas emissions reductions, we're also looking for organizations to commit to resilience and adaptation, either within their own operations or within the communities that they're working with. So that will be an important thing to look at as this award category is evaluated. And then following market best practices for mitigating or reducing emissions. And that would be looking at use of emerging technologies that are innovative, cutting edge, and also kind of sector specific applications. So that could be in transportation, it could be in buildings, water, waste, all of the activities that contribute to an organization's carbon footprint. We'll be looking for best practices and innovation there. And then beyond just moving forward and benefiting the organization, we're looking for those that are educating others on this, passing that knowledge along so that others may learn from examples and apply those practices to their operations as well. Next slide, please. So for eligibility, we're looking for organizations that are based in the United States, but also if they're based here, if their emissions are occurring anywhere in the world, we want that to be captured. So that's applying to organizations that are corporations, government entities, or academic institutions. And we're looking for those with a budget over 10 million and at least 100 employees. And the applications will be reviewed by steering committee members. They'll go through a screening process to look for any infractions or violations for environmental regulations, civil rights, or financial improprieties. So that will be considered as part of the evaluation. Next slide, please. So getting into detail here about the emissions reductions and the inventorying. So what we're looking for is scope 1 and 2 emissions that that are publicly reported. And also within the scope 2 emissions, reporting of both location-based and market-based methodologies for the years that are submitted. Applicants should conduct scope 3 screening. So when I mentioned the supply chain, value chain suppliers and distributors, and other categories within scope 3 emissions, a screening in line with GHG protocols guidelines would be expected there. Inventories should be third-party verified to a limited level of assurance at minimum. And it can also be a more rigorous verification as well. And then we're going to be looking for for any renewable energy purchases that have been made that are contributing to the inventory. We'll be looking for renewable energy certificates to substantiate those claims. So at the end of this slide, there's some, or this PowerPoint presentation, there's a supplemental section that has even more detail on these eligibility requirements, but those are the highlights for eligibility. Next slide, please. A couple more things related to targets. So as I mentioned, the target has to be publicly announced. That could be a press release that goes out. And it must capture all of the full footprint of the organization. So if it's, it's be a US-based organization, but if they're doing global operations, then the inventory must include that. The target should be an absolute reduction target. So what's meant by that is it should be in metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, not intensity, so not looking at per product manufactured, also not just a percentage. A percentage would be, showing a reduction, but then it should be converted into the actual metric tons of carbon dioxide reduced, so that future progress towards that could be accounted for year to year for each inventory. And then the base year. So if a base year is established and a target is working from that base year, it needs to be no more than 4 years old prior to the year that the target was publicly announced. So those need to be within proximity of each other, of the base year and the target being formulated. Next year, please, or next slide, please. Okay, some more info here on the criteria. demonstrate emissions reductions. We want innovative and thought leadership. So really, this is looking for organizations that are on the cutting edge, that are really deploying strategies to address climate change that are above and beyond just business as usual or the perfunctory way of mitigating climate change. We're really going for organizations that are pulling out all the stops. We're looking for disclosure of risks and opportunities related to climate change. So, that would be evaluating, potential anticipated impact from climate change within the organization. And then really putting all of this together in a very integrated way. So an organization that's put together a plan that evaluates quantitatively their emissions and lays out a plan to reduce and is making progress towards that, will be given a very strong preference for an award. And then organizations that engage with external stakeholders. So that could be nonprofits, government organization, communities, particularly communities that are disproportionately impacted by climate change, will be an important consideration. We want to be able to see that organizations are reducing climate change impacts for themselves, but also spreading that out to the communities where they do business. And then also education and training of staff and management, and also external stakeholders, partners and suppliers to stay up to date on the latest science and approaches for climate change adaptation and mitigation. Next slide, please. Some of the questions that we're looking for feedback on, the objectives that I've described, the eligibility requirements, and the evaluation criteria that I mentioned. So we're looking for feedback on each of those areas. And then also, as I mentioned at the end, that we're looking for organizations that engage with external stakeholders, like communities, and we wanted to make sure that equity and climate justice are included. But we also want to make sure that we're tracking that. So as we think about these topics, we'd like to get feedback on how we might be able to verify and validate those claims. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'll jump into the individual leadership award category. So this is recognizing individuals within an organization that are demonstrating exemplary leadership. So this is like before everything I mentioned was related to an organization wide. This would be looking at people within organizations that are really leading the way on climate change. So winning applications will show this outstanding leadership by demonstrating someone that's in a position of influence or is within an organization that's really moving the needle and getting the attention of people that are in leadership positions and coming up with ideas that can be used to reduce emissions and advance adaptation and resilience. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So again, we're looking for individuals that are working within organizations that are based in the US, if their operations are happening elsewhere in the world. And we're looking for individuals that are within an organization, government entity, corporation, academic institution with a budget over 100 million. And they should be employed and reside within the United States, the individual. Again, this will go through the CLA steering committee for evaluation, the applications. And those activities mentioned that demonstrate this leadership should take place between January 1st, 2019 and December 31st, 2021. Next slide, please. So the evaluation criteria, what we would be looking for is innovation, thought leadership, initiatives, programs that have been launched or led by the organization that advance target setting, benchmarks and pathways for greenhouse gas reduction or climate change adaptation. And then we'll look at the quality of the engagement, really showing that this is going above and beyond. So someone that's done work in a community outreach, engagement, or a program that's giving back to a community would be given strong consideration. Someone that's working with peers in a very collaborative way to influence behavior change would be strongly considered. And those that are passing the knowledge on within their organizations. So that could be education, training, mentorship to help pass the information along to peers within an organization. Next slide. And we're looking for questions on this award category as well. So similar to the organizational award category, we'll looking for questions on objectives, on the eligibility requirements that have been proposed, and the evaluation criteria that I've laid out here in these slides. So we look forward to feedback on that. And for the next award category, I'll pass it back to Christopher.
Thanks, Dan. And just to remind folks, if you have any questions or comments about what is being presented right now, please share them. Again, we're asking for your feedback now, but we're going to be asking for your feedback later. So if you have any thoughts or comments or questions about what's being presented, please chime in, literally chime in. Okay. So as previously noted, the Innovation Partnership Certificate is given to organizations that have worked collaboratively on leading edge climate initiatives. Past award winners have included partnerships between public and private organizations working together collaboratively with a shared goal of addressing some aspect of climate change. Past award winners include Tyson's Food and Environmental Defense Fund in 2020 for deploying an initiative to support Tyson's sustainability strategy and help meet increasing customer demand for more sustainably grown food. Or also in 2020, the Wyoming Integrated Test Center, which is a public-private partnership that brings together 6 organizations from a public and private sector to develop viable uses for CO2 emissions from a power plant. And Bank of America and American Forest in 2019 for carrying out the Community Relief Program, as well as the Electric Vehicle Charging Carbon Coalition, which founded 7 different organizations from private and public sectors brought together to develop a creative, all-new option for expanding EV charging infrastructure. So as you can see, these past partnerships have been made up of more than one or more primary stakeholders, sometimes from a government entity or academic institution, and a public sector. Though I should note that while this award category was originally created to highlight public-private as well as public and public partnerships, partnerships that comprise only of private-private stakeholders may be considered, but only if the activity for the partnership is outside the normal scope of businesses for those two or more organizations. The objective of this award category is to recognize innovative practices and partnerships that have demonstrated significant greenhouse gas reductions and collaborative results and best practices on targets and pathways that have been shared with others. So we haven't made significant changes to this award category. It's still open to a broad range of partnerships, generally including local, state, and federal government entities, as well as academic institutions and or public sector. At the time of the application award period closing, the partnership must be active. It must be supported by a legal agreement or arrangement, and they must be publicly promoting and documenting their efforts to address climate change. As with other categories, the activities must be located in the US, but the primary stakeholders could be based elsewhere. And the organizations within the partnership must have conducted an emissions assessment of all the attributes related to the partnership in order to establish a baseline. As with other categories and partnerships, the accomplishments must have occurred between the January 1 and December 31st of 2021. But what's not eligible? Because of the nature of the partnerships and because they can be public-private, public-public, private-private, the actions undertaken by the organizations must fall outside the normal scope of business of any of the organizations. So if an organization's scope of business includes, let's say, helping others reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, then the partnership wouldn't really be eligible for a partnership award because that organization's main business is helping other businesses reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Also, if the work is being done under the partnership as part of their normal operations and they're paying for it, then that while it is a worthwhile business deal, it would not be eligible for consideration. And this slide provides the proposed criteria for evaluating the partnership applications. In recognizing leadership, the partners need to be innovative in their approach, strategic in their operations, and provide leadership in addressing climate change. The results of the partnership need to demonstrate significant and verifiable emissions reductions, as well as provide an outreach and education to stakeholders, both internally and externally, about the achievements of the partnership, as well as lessons learned, best practices, standard operating procedures, and other means of engagement and promotion of the efforts. We are looking for a diversity of partnerships to recognize. We are particularly interested in recognizing partnerships with the vulnerable and underserved communities. So you've seen many of these similar questions before. As with other award categories, we're looking for feedback on the objectives of this award category, the proposed eligibility requirements, and the evaluation criteria. Ultimately, the goal of the feedback is meant for you to help us adjust the award criteria to ensure that we're rewarding meaningful and effective leadership. And as with any feedback, we are equally interested in what works and why, as opposed to what doesn't work and why it won't. So when providing your input, please be sure to include not only what you don't like, but what you do and why. And I'll pass it over to my good friend, Verena.
Hi, thank you, Chris. So here's what we're thinking in terms of timing. So today is May 24th. We have obviously our webinar. We are going to make this webinar available to a variety of stakeholders so that people see it, not just those that are participating in the Climate Leadership Conference. So in many ways, you guys are first coming to the conference to hear this, but we want to make sure that a wide net of stakeholders hear this. And the idea is to get comments on these feedback questions by July 31st. That will allow us to take August, when most people are on vacation, really taking August and part of September to really dissect the feedback and to figure out what the path is for the Climate Leadership Awards. The idea is that in September, we would have a public webinar that would summarize the feedback and the criteria and the next steps in terms of how we take the awards forward. I say all this in a way to anticipate what we're going to do, but in many ways, we don't know until you provide us with the input. If we get lots and lots of feedback that where we need more time to pause on it and to really rethink things, this might affect the timeline. If we get no feedback, while silence is often golden, in this case, we might need to do some additional stakeholder outreach to make sure that those that are in the stakeholder community really have a chance to provide feedback. But assuming that we do get feedback and that we are able to act on it, the idea would be that the 2023 Climate Leadership Awards application would open up in October 1, with the idea of having the application period close in December. And we did that really on purpose because we know that a lot of companies have their prior year's greenhouse gas inventories third-party assured or verified in August, September. Sometimes they do it earlier, but that's right around the time that the data is verified. And we also know that it's often when a lot of sustainability announcements are coming out. And so I think to try to sort of catch the most recent progress, this is why the timing is what it is. And then we are anticipating that we would have an award ceremony sometime in the spring of next year, which is when we are anticipating that the next Climate Leadership Conference will take place either March or May of 2023. So there is a bit of a lag time between us submitting the application in December and getting recognized in May for events for activities that you've done in 2021, but such as the lag of reporting and recognition. So with that, really, I guess, well, I sort of said this already, but if you can provide us also feedback on the proposed timeline. Does this make sense? Do we need to take longer? Do we need to road test or road show this criteria for a longer period of time? If you can also provide us question number 25 here, provide us with feedback on the additional items related to the awards. So for example, do we need tools and resources? Do we need additional recognition opportunities? Does the timing work? I think also what we're really interested in learning about is ultimately how can these awards be updated to serve in 2023 and beyond that inform corporate climate leadership? So for example, if companies submit their awards or organizations, I should say, it's not just companies, organizations or individuals or partnerships should submit their awards in the late fall of each year, and then they are provided with that award in the spring of the following year. Does that in any way serve their efforts in 2023, 2024? Namely, how is winning an award helping an organization advance a climate action internally and then externally with stakeholders? So timing does matter, and we are keen to try to get that right. And so some feedback there would be great. You can send your awards feedback to questions@climateleadershipawards.org. Our awards website, climateleadershipconference.org/awards. And then as always, climateleadershipconference.org is where you can find more information. Okay, so we've got folks that are monitoring the chat and wanted to hear if there are any questions. We do see one that has come in that really is more of a comment that talks about, I guess, commending the opportunities to highlight leadership and climate resilience, and that could potentially draw a wider audience to the Climate Leadership Awards, which have traditionally more focused on decarbonization. I'll also just say a couple words on that. When it comes to resilience, the resilience conversation and the decarbonization conversation are one. They're not sort of one or the other. And I think as we've seen over the years, resilience planning really does incorporate aspects of decarbonization into it. But when we think about resilience, a lot of resilience can be measured in very different ways than just greenhouse gas mitigation. Before I get into that, because I'm hoping it can spark some questions. For those listening in, if you can put your questions into the chat, then we'll be able to see it from our end over here. Oh, sorry, not the chat, the Q&A function. I'm sorry, guys. I apologize. In the question and answer function. I'm sorry. So when it comes to resilience, one of the things that we think about if we were to evaluate the criteria is it on cost savings, potential cost avoided due to climate impacts, whether it's extreme weather events or other climate impacts? Is it qualitative? What does that look like? What is good? What does leadership on resilience look like? And that's going to look very different depending on the region of the country you're operating from, the potentially the supply chains that you have, the locality in which you're in. So those are some things that we're entering into some new and important territory, and want to make sure that we get it right. So again, the question and answer function in Chime, please go ahead and add your questions there.
Yeah, Verena, to follow up on what you were saying about resilience, as I pointed out in the slides, we're looking at resilience from the perspective of both an organization's operations and maybe some of their assets that they have at risk, or who they're working with and things that they may have have potential to be impacted by climate change, but also that community engagement and working within communities that are also impacted by climate change. I think that really demonstrates strong leadership to be able to go out there and work in communities and understand those impacts, and potentially offer assistance in planning or trying to reduce those vulnerabilities. So yeah, just looking at it from different angles as well.
I think that also kind of raises the question around equity, as we look at equity and justice as a potential added layer into an organization's leadership on climate. Those are, metrics that are currently under development from a number of different stakeholders. And so which are the ones that we should consider? How does one measure impact, particularly at the local level? And I think what we have to remember is that many of the organizations that have won in the past, whether they are a port in a city or whether they are a university or whether they are a large multinational company, how they show up to advance new metrics of leadership is going to look different. And so when we're looking at evaluating a multinational conglomerate versus a local government versus a university, how do we look at that and provide sort of an equal weighting or fairness in terms of how those different organizational entities are evaluated? We specifically don't have different sort of categories for each and every entity that is applying for an award. And so what is the sort of scale and lens that we should be applying to be able to sort of to fairly evaluate and identify what is leadership? I did want to ask a question of kind of lessons learned. Maybe have Matt and Chris talk a little about. Matt and Chris are, full disclosure, former teammates of mine at EPA, and are very well versed and very experienced in leading programs that provide recognition to companies. And I think we really leaned heavily on our EPA friends here to sort of help us think through how to reimagine or update or refresh these awards that keep in step with an evolving landscape on climate leadership. I'm wondering, Matt or Chris, if you can talk a little bit about sort of the philosophy around why we're proposing this approach going forward.
Sure, Verena. I can jump in. Chris can join me on that. But I would just offer that one of the challenges that we've had with the past award structure is having a number of categories. Sometimes we have applications that really seem to fit in a different award category than proposed, and by shifting from the 6 or 7 categories that we currently have to a fewer, broader set of categories of organizational leadership, individual leadership, and partnerships, it gives us flexibility to recognize a broader array of actions, whether they be from larger more capable organizations with more resources, or smaller organizations. It gives us a little bit more flexibility to highlight leadership and adjust kind of the bar for high-level leadership across organizations that aren't easily comparable.
Yeah, and this is Chris, and I recently was I worked in another awards program recently where we tried to expand the scope from one area to look at leadership and impact. And in doing so, how we did it was posed a series of questions in the application that were not required to be filled, but just it sort of to prompt the applicant to think about what they're doing in relations to impact and access and engagement in the marketplace. And it's going to be a learning experience because this first year of the applicants, you could tell they were uncomfortable leaving blank spaces because they would start typing things that were incomplete or making broad statements that were unverifiable. And so I think this is it's a process and a learning to hone in ways of identifying what is leadership in the marketplace, because it is a moving target and it's a broad level of stakeholders, which then, as Verena was pointing out, different sectors have different metrics, and how do you define that and how do you engage them in the process?
I do see we have a couple more questions coming in, so why don't we dive in? And just for those that are looking at where the Q&A section is, thank you to this one stakeholder that has pointed it out. It is in the lower left corner, so go ahead and enter your questions in there. I'll ask this one question, then I'll do a follow-up of my own. One question is, how do you see the Climate Leadership Awards differentiated from other organizational reporting, such as CDP or the Dow Jones Sustainability Index? Who wants to take that one?
I can start that off. So as I mentioned in a few of my slides, we're looking for information that's been put out to the public, reported on emissions and reductions, inventories, and target setting. So those platforms mentioned, disclosure platforms or evaluation of sustainability, they have some metrics or indicators that they look at that would overlap with some of that information that we're looking to take in. So companies that are reporting through that or being evaluated through those platforms would have that information available that we'd be looking for as part of the application process. So yeah, it's compatible with the information that's being shared on those platforms.
This is Matt, and I would just jump in. Verena, sorry about that. That I think one of the keys that we have a history of at EPA of recognizing companies and for aggressive reduction targets, and that continues to be a key feature here. We're looking for companies that are not just doing a single action, but really have kind of a holistic approach. And a key part of that is setting aggressive reduction targets and demonstrating action towards those, moving towards absolute reductions, and going beyond programs, particularly like CDP, that are asking for disclosure of activities. This is really seeking to highlight the cream of the crop that in recent years serve as a great example for others, help benchmark against others, and highlight what more they might be able to do, what they could replicate.
I'll add one piece to that, which is, and I think that, and I'm wondering if the person asking the question is also getting at the fact that a lot of these other groups either have leadership sort of baked in. So when I think about the Science Based Targets Initiative, or like CDP has a rating system, they have, A minus, B, and a lot of companies, that's a smaller club of companies that report to CDP that get that rating. And then obviously the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, ranks companies And then there's also a lot of other platforms and programs that provide kind of an evaluation on companies. And I think what is really helpful is both to ask people, is an additional climate leadership award needed in this landscape where it used to be that you had mainly just reporting programs. This is, I think, going back a decade, and then you have these partnership programs, but you also have climate leadership awards that would provide sort of the differentiation of the leaders. Well, that programs that companies, or sort of initiatives that companies are signing on to, have an element of leadership already baked in. So I think as we're designing these climate leadership awards, is really a sense of really identifying the best of the best, really looking at a combination of factors, target setting, also achievement. So what has been achieved over the past few years? So whereas you might have a ranking and a rating system that looks at a company's current performance, these awards have the potential to also look backwards and say, well, how far have organizations come? Some of these sustainability indexes or some of these programs are really geared toward companies and don't necessarily encompass other organizations that the climate leadership awards could. And then I think also of note, the climate leadership awards identify individuals, which I think we're one of the few that do. And then also with partnership and collaborations. And that's important, I think, to also note that we can't always go everywhere. We can go fast by ourselves, we can go further in a group. And so that's, I think, why, at least since 2015, the Climate Leadership Awards have recognized that, partnerships are really important, particularly when you're marrying different actors together, whether it's companies and cities and other organizations in a particular region, that they can all leverage their strengths together. And that's something that we want to really continue to drive when we look at public-private partnerships. But this is an opportunity to ask you all, what is most valuable in this. I wouldn't call it crowded, because we actually want as many people coming to the party as possible, but to the extent that there is a lot happening, where can we provide a really strong differentiator? Let me just see if my teammates have any questions before I move on to the other question. Anything else they want to add?
No, I think that was great, Verena.
Yeah, I was just going to add that because this awards program has individuals and innovative partnerships, they're not necessarily captured by the other sustainability indexes. And so this is an opportunity to show, as you point out, what we can do together.
I also want to point out with the individual award, I mean, in working with companies, as the four of us here have for a long time, we know that it's not always easy to do that. We know that a lot of individuals that are corporate sustainability directors or managers, even at the C-suite, have a pretty significant role and a pretty significant challenge in moving or helping to move their companies and their teams forward on sustainability. Often they are given mandates but no resources, or they're given responsibilities but no authority. And we recognize that this is across the board in companies. And so in providing an individual leadership award, it is also a way to signal more broadly on what success can look like, and to inspire others, and also to signal and to help people gain support across their organizations. So, the world continues to evolve. And as more and more companies set ambitious targets that are aligned with the Paris Agreement, as climate is becoming more and more if not the sustainability topic, we're starting to see it becoming more mainstream. The SEC has a proposed rule that is out, that is due, comments are due June 17th. And that really brings climate into more of a mainstream conversation. So is an individual award still needed as the climate conversation moves forward? We'd like to think yes, because you can never take your foot off the pedal. Hopefully an electrically vehicle pedal or a zero emission vehicle pedal. But nevertheless, that's it's important to kind of wrestle with that question.
I would just say the questioner asked a great question about how we differentiate this awards program from CDP and Dow Jones, and you've heard our kind of take on that. We welcome your thoughts and comments. That would be really helpful.
I'll add one more thing, is that the question was asking about the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, and my my understanding of that is that it's really comprised of very large companies that are publicly traded. But based upon our eligibility criteria that we've set for these awards, it could also include small and mid-sized companies. So it's a larger potential pool of applicants that could be eligible for these awards.
And besides companies, it could be institutions of higher education, governmental agencies, yes.
Exactly.
Yep.
We have a logistical question of, will the questions for feedback be available to review and consider after this workshop? The answer is yes. We're going to make this recorded workshop available widely, and we will find creative ways to get these questions out to our stakeholders. So yes. I want to turn to one sort of a question or a comment, and I think it's kind of a segues into a point that I wanted to raise. Oh, Dan, did you want to say something? Oh, okay. So we have one question, sort of a question first / comment that says, climate adaptation and equity engagement are emerging topics. So timeline of actions for and eligibility for individual and organizational awards should be increased through at least June of 2022. So I think what this question is saying is that these are really new areas where a lot of organizations are engaging in. So we may want to think about extending the eligibility of the actual time frame to be able to capture emerging initiatives versus if you were to sort of look back and just make it, FY 2021 or calendar year 2021, maybe some of those initiatives and efforts have not yet, been developed. So that's a great point. Good point taken. Something for us to consider. I wanted just to, before I kind of add my thoughts to that, wanted to get thoughts from any teammates.
Yeah, this is a question I've been sort of, not specifically this question itself, but the idea of climate adaptation and equity engagement, and the issue of, do we incorporate it into everybody's, or do we make it standalone to highlight those activities? And I would really benefit from everyone's thoughts and input on, do we integrate it into the SOPs for all the other awards, or does it make sense to highlight it separately as a unique, and as you point out, it requires a different time frame. It requires maybe different eligibility requirements. But those are sort of the questions that we've been talking about internally, but it would benefit from having your corporate perspectives on, should it be integrated or does it need to be on its own?
I think, just adding to some of that point, one of the things that we think about when we designed or when we're proposing a refresh of these awards is that, how do we remain nimble and be able to recognize where leadership is evolving as it evolves? So one point I think, and Chris, maybe tangential to your point, and I'll use the renewable energy example as just an example, but as we move to sort of quantitative, verifiable or veritable emissions reductions to a bit more of the how and looking at additional impacts, how do we sort of keep in step with what is deemed as really key and important? And part of what is deemed as key and important is just a natural evolution of progress. So for example, with renewable energy, when we think specifically about green power, which is voluntary renewable energy purchasing, often by organizations, over the last couple of years, the debate has been, and this is something that is going to come up on the workshop that, for those of you that are attending in person, we're going to have a workshop on clean energy purchasing, which our other former teammate at EPA, my former teammate, is going to be participating in. But it looks at sort of where are you adding renewables? Where are you, and what is the impact of those renewables on the grid in the region that you're operating in? It was no longer just how much green power are you purchasing. I use that as an example because that conversation was allowed to sort of emerge over the last few years as more and more organizations became comfortable with purchasing green power, and it became more ubiquitous. And I want my green power teammates to talk about that in a moment, maybe to expand on that. But where I'm going with that as an example is that there are going to be different elements, different levels of climate leadership within organizations that are some that are emerging and some that are sort of more mature. And I think, trying to keep in step with where the trend lines are, particularly in areas where things are happening fast and there isn't as much, years of experience, that then you see this, another wave of new developments occur. So in the areas of resilience and equity, those are emerging areas. And so what does leadership look like in an area where there hasn't traditionally been a lot of leadership recognition in the past? And then to that point that I was mentioning with the example earlier is when you've had a long history of a particular practice, how that practice potentially evolves to have more qualitative measures. And these things all sort of collide against each other. So you can imagine, sort of to wrap it up together, when you're purchasing renewable energy, is it voluntary? Is it in a part of the country that needs renewables? Is it equitable? Does it also build resilience? So you start to see how different layers can can compound. And I think thinking through, what is the right measure of leadership as these things are evolving?
Well, I'll take that, Verena, and I think to pick up on both the questions about adaptation, equity, and your example of renewable energy leadership. I think one of the advantages this update affords us as managers of an award program, combined joint managers of an award program, is that things do change. Practices do change, new ideas enter. The idea that leading companies or leading organizations could engage their communities on issues of equity or adaptation, or go beyond just simply buying large volumes of renewable energy to think about how to have a greater impact. Having fewer award categories in the Climate Leadership Award Program gives us, arguably, the ability to be a little more nimble in recognizing the newest forms of leadership. We can't pretend to know what they will be. We are active, each of our programs, in the marketplace in different ways and have insights from that. But seeing the applications come in, seeing what companies are doing through those applications are hugely informative as well, and really do help us see next wave, new ideas, and having fewer award categories also gives us the chance to message those a little bit easier. We don't have to talk about 6 or 7 sets of winners in different award categories. It allows us to then amplify the messages that we're seeing on behalf of our award winners and their industries, and with the hope of making a greater impact, doing more storytelling throughout the year between the instances where we actually give out the awards. So recapping, the hope that by shifting to 3 awards, it gives us some flexibility to recognize new activities around adaptation, equity, and other mitigation activities, and really then do a better job storytelling to encourage replication and frankly, one-upsmanship.
Do any of my teammates have more to add to that?
Well, Verena, you mentioned an evolution of the nuances that are considered as part of awards. And I think about greenhouse gas reduction and how just years ago setting a target was, big news. And now it's getting into more net zero and carbon neutrality, and then the specific pathways within sectors of how that's happening. So, I also see this as an opportunity for these categories to evolve over time of resilience and equity. And that's part of leadership. I think tying this back to the theme of this conference is that leadership adapts to the needs of the challenges that exist. So we're proposing a big revamp this year, but there's potential in the future to fine tune some of the categories to be more specific about the needs that are out there in the marketplace.
And I'll build off of that briefly, Dan, to say that, I think you'll see that in the proposed award categories that we are building off of a foundation as well. This is not whole cloth change. And, while we've seen a lot of great, exciting long-term reduction goals announced, many of them net zero, we're still looking for the targets that are being set in service of those long-term goals. We still want to see, from our historical perspective on these award programs, what are the aggressive targets that are in a 3 to 10, maybe 3 to 15 year period toward those long-term net zero goals. So we hope it's a mix of, what the Climate Leadership Awards have been to date and building on that to be even more capable and effective.
I want to pivot to another question that has come up. I know, at least in the way that we've had conversations, but I know that this is something that several stakeholders have asked about when it comes to revising criteria. Different sectors face different challenges. And so I think what we're trying to do here with the revision is to keep it open so that different sectors can equally participate and provide their application. My question back to sort of the broader audience, or sort of, to the broader audience, is when we are evaluating that criteria, I mean, a chemical company is going to face different challenges than a data center company, different challenges in a company whose vast majority of their supply chain is in agriculture, to a company where the vast majority of their overall value chain impacts are maybe outside the United States. And so when we look at leadership, I think there are a lot of companies that are working to try to advance solutions through R&D development, through partnerships, but those solutions haven't necessarily scaled, come to fruition, or scaled at a point where they can become cost effective. And I'm thinking about things like carbon capture and storage, or maybe direct air capture, or other nascent solutions or climate tech solutions that are currently still being explored for those industries that have hard to abate greenhouse gas emissions. So the question is, in trying to keep the application broad and such that organizations from different sizes and different sectors can all apply, because otherwise it gets really difficult to have a bifurcated application process for different sectors. But how, when we evaluate, when we look at what is leadership, what are the considerations for those sectors that are really hard to abate? What does success in leadership look? Is it to be measured differently than for company or than for organizations that might have solutions that are cost effective and scalable in the current time?
I think I know you are asking that of our participants who are watching now and in the future, but I would offer some quick thoughts on that. I think historically we have worked with companies to understand what they and their peers are doing in terms of climate activities, and we're capable of seeing the bar of climate leadership across different types of sectors, and arguably grade on a curve. So I think we're sensitive that leadership is going to be different in different cases, but we're also looking to highlight those that can really spur greater action, greater achievement in those sectors, and help us further our decarbonization goals. So we want to just see if there's any last questions before we reach the end of our time. And while we wait to see that, we very much appreciate your participation and attendance. As you can see, we have over a decade of experience with this awards program. Your feedback on how it could be revised and updated to capture the newest and evolving forms of climate leadership, to highlight those for others, to spur internal motivation and drive and support for those of you who are leading these actions, are parts of our goals. Feedback on its utility to you, your peers, the industry, and as we see more organizations trying to recognize and disclose information about climate leadership, would be most helpful.
And just to kind of reiterate, where should people send their comments? Okay. Oh, there we go. So send feedback to questions@climateleadershipawards.org. If we can kind of scooch to the end of the slide with all of our information, we are all working on this. And so if folks want to have a conversation or sort of, provide some additional feedback that would require a phone call, we are available within reason to engage directly with stakeholders.
And we will see you also Wednesday and Thursday at the conference. So we're happy to take questions there as well.
Yes, we will be at the conference, all four of us. So I recognize that for those that are tuning in virtually, for you virtually, the programming starts at 1 o'clock. For those that are going to be there in person, we have workshops in the morning. We do have, like I said, the main stage in the afternoon with breaks, and we have a reception. So come find any one of us, and we would love to talk to you about this.
And this presentation will be posted on the Climate Leadership Awards website, as well as other websites, along with the questions, so that it's going to be available to a variety of stakeholders to provide feedback.
So questions at climateleadershipconference.org. Okay.
Great. Well, thank you, Verena, Dan, Chris, our colleagues who are making this video live stream possible. I, for one, will see you all tomorrow. Look forward to seeing my colleagues as well.
Thank you.
Thank you all.